Hello, it's Denise from Women Beyond a Certain Age. We have a wonderful guest today, and I have to thank my friend Patricia Greenberg for introducing me to Sky Bergman, because that's how I got our guest today. Hi, Sky.
How are you doing? Thank you so much for having me.
I'm thrilled. Now, I want to tell people one or two little things about you, Sky, and then I want you to tell us about you. I went to, where were we? In Santa Barbara. Pat, everybody, most people know Patricia Greenberg that listen to us, Sky, because she has been an aging expert about a half dozen times and has a new book coming out called It's Okay to Get Old. So Pat said to me, Denise, I'll pick you up and we'll go to Santa Barbara. This wonderful woman who I know in the aging well community is how Pat describes you. And then when I met you, I thought, oh my God, she's young, but never mind. I knew what Pat meant. Since I'm older than the Hills and I'm older than both of you, I'm a little sensitive to the word old, but never mind. So we get to see you. I get there and I had no idea, Sky. I mean, I was looking forward to spending some time with Pat. I had no idea your book, which is called Lives Well Lived Generations. And you had it on the table and I bought one. And then you gave me the DVD that's like the companion film that you made to go with it. And I watched it yesterday and I sent you an email right after saying I was crying. It was so enjoyable. They were tears of joy. Now, I want people to know this about you. You're an award-winning photographer, filmmaker, author, and educator. After a 30-year teaching career, Sky is embracing the third act. Well, a lot of us that listen to this podcast are in our third act. Sometimes, Sky, I think I'm in my fourth act, but that's a whole nother story. She is professor emeritus of photography and video and a former chair of the art and design department of California Polytechnic State University in San Luis Obispo. So, did you retire from that, Sky, and decide to make this film? How did you get I mean, this is just amazing to me that you did this. It's really, really inspiring.
Well, thank you for that wonderful, glowing introduction.
No,
Wow,
it's true.
I'm humbled. I'm totally humbled. And it was great to have met you through that book signing and just amazing that you both drove up for that. And it was just a delight. I had so much fun that night. Well, to answer your question, I actually had never done a film before I did Lives Well Lived. So if I can do it, you can do it too. It was just a passion project for me. And it came about because I was looking at approaching 50. I'm 58 now, just full disclosure on my age.
Oh, you're a youngster.
Well, I think for many, especially for many women, that half century mark is a big moment. And I was looking at approaching that birthday and not finding anything positive out there in the media about aging. Everything that I saw was how we could avoid aging,
Yes.
what creams we could use to look more, in quotes, youthful. And, I wanted to be able to embrace my age, not try and shy away from it and try and avoid it. Because let's face it, the one thing we all have in common is that we age each and every day. So we might as well embrace it rather than, trying to figure out how we can avoid it because it's unavoidable. And
Unavoidable.
right?
Unavoidable.
Absolutely. And here in my own life, I had this amazing role model of my grandmother, who at the age of was, like I said, she was turning 100 around the same time I was turning 50, was still working out at the gym. She didn't start working out until she was 80. So she proved to me that it's never too late to start something new, even going to the gym, which was, I loved going to the gym with her. And I thought, when she was on the exercise bicycle, I thought, I better film this because nobody's going to believe that at almost 100 she's still at the gym. And I thankfully had a mic on her and I just said to her, "Can you give me some words of wisdom?" And she said things like, "Well, be kind and live life to the limits." And I came back from that trip. She lived in Florida and I'm out here in California. And I thought, I know there's other people out there like my grandmother. I know they exist. They are just not being highlighted. And I'm going to set on a quest to find these people, and not thinking I was necessarily going to do a film. I just knew I had to find other people that I could model my life around, that I could look forward to my positive aging adventure. And so I sent an email blast out to all my friends and family and all the students that I had taught at Cal Poly. And I said, "Here's this little 1 minute clip of my grandmother at the gym. And if you have somebody like that in your life, please nominate them for this project." And I was inundated by heartwarming nominations. And so I spent the next 4 years interviewing 40 people with a collective life experience of 3,000 years. They were all 75 plus. And that was my adventure. And along the way, I realized I needed to make it into a film, but that's not how it started. And I have a little quote and above my desk that said, "I've never done anything like this before, never interviewed people, whatever. I just knew that I had to do this." And my quote that I look at all the time says, "Your decision should be based on curiosity over fear." And when I'm in doubt, I look at that quote and I remember, how am I basing my decision? And is it a curiosity, or is fear leading me away from what I know my passion is? Or am I going to follow my sense of curiosity, even though I'm not sure where it's going to take me? And luckily enough for this project, I followed my sense of curiosity and just kind of went full bore into this whole project.
I got to read. I read the first half. The pictures in it, just so our audience knows, there is a picture of your 100-year-old grandmother at the gym on the exercise cycle, and I thought, my God, everyone in the world should have that picture like on their refrigerator. Do you know what I mean? I mean, talk about a role model, not the usual things like, some size 4 with inflated lips or some magazine cover. I thought, this is the picture that women should have on their desk or on their refrigerator or carry in their wallet, showing your grandmother on the exercise cycle at 100 years old.
Absolutely. I mean, it
It's
gave me hope.
extraordinary.
And there were so many times where I would think, "Oh, I don't want to go exercise or do it." And then I would think of my grandmother on her little exercise bike, doing her thing and lifting her little weights. And I would get my butt out of bed and get to the gym and go do my workout because, she had a phrase which a lot of people have: move it or lose it. And
Yes.
I really think that has stuck with me, that I try and do my yoga practice every day. I try and walk every day. And it's because I have the role model of my grandmother who, we age, we definitely lose some strength and mobility, but whatever we can do to maintain, I think is super, super important. It has to be, for me, it's a priority over a lot of other things.
Yes.
To do that.
Sky, it's so simple, actually. I think we put up barriers. You used the word fear, and a lot of it is fear-based to people. People put up barriers. I've done it in my life. You don't have enough money. If I had enough money, I could do that. Oh, if I had a better car, I could do that. Oh, if I had a boyfriend, I could do that. You know what I mean? I mean, I don't live close to a gym. I can't afford a gym. Do you know what I mean? All the stuff that we say. But in reality, no, you can make anything happen when you decide to do it in a day. When I worked on, and with my background, I worked on tons of live TV shows and planned segments, but on TV shows. So we always were looking for content as a producer. And Sky, one of the best ones would always be like the housewife that would show up on the show with 2 empty milk cartons that she filled with water, and she used those as her weights. Do you know what I mean? And I mean, she bought a big rubber band and put it around her legs and created her own gym. So I love that your grandmother gave you inspiration, because I think that's what we need. I think it's very difficult sometimes to we face barriers that we've created just because and also for what we're fed, what our society tells us and what people tell us, that older women are not attractive, or whatever, kind of mind stuff that you hear from the media. It's not easy. It's not easy.
It isn't, for sure. And I think that, my grandmother never let the number of the years that she'd been on this planet define what she could and could not do. She was very proud of how old she was, but she never said, oh, I'm this age, so I shouldn't be going to the gym.
Right.
And I think there are a lot of people that either it's societal or self-imposed that say, oh, I'm this age, so I should be doing this and I shouldn't be doing that. And I think
that's right.
That really limits us in our lives when we do that. And I took my grandmother to Italy for her 100th birthday so she could see all of her relatives. And it was so wonderful. And she was a little worried she wasn't going to remember how to speak Italian. And she immediately, and she speaks to relatives on the phone, but something about, she was worried about being there. And as soon as she got there, she was just like talking away and having a great time. And a bunch of people said, wow, you're going to take your grandmother. She's 100 years old. And are you sure that's going to be okay? And I said, you know what? If something happens, it's going to happen, whether she's in the US or in Italy. But at least we have enjoyed our life to the fullest. And I think that was her motto, was really to just enjoy every moment, to not be fearful, to do those things, to really experience life, because sitting home and waiting to die is no way to live.
You know what? There's easier ways to die. I mean, just sit there and be bored and annoy others. I mean, bite the bullet. You know what I mean? I mean, really. Sky, I think that you taking your grandmother to Italy when she was 100, it shows bravery, curiosity, and smarts on both your sides. Do you know what I mean? For both of you, because, and as you just said, of course there's fears. And I love that other people want to make you afraid by saying, do you think that's a good idea? Yeah, I do think it's a good idea. That's why I'm doing it. I recently went down the Danube by myself because my husband doesn't like to travel anymore, but I wanted to see Budapest. I cannot tell you. Now, I'm 73. Most of the people on the cruise, they were every age, but most of them are probably about in their mid-70s. Now, this is what was interesting to me, Scott. When I was sitting alone, of course, I was invited for dinner, but I ate breakfast alone and stuff I wanted to. I enjoy myself. So women would come over and join me for a minute with a cup of coffee and say this in whispers: I understand you're here alone. And I said, yeah, they go, are you widowed? I said, no, my husband, I hope not. He was alive when I left. And they all said, this was what they would say, whispering behind their hands: oh, if something happens to my husband, I sure hope I could travel alone. And I said to them, well, of course you could. Again, we're back to fear. Now, we're back to fear, and you have to get over the fears. Now, this is what I want to read to people. Your book, Lives Well Lived Generations. And the tagline is resilience, positivity, and purpose at every age. So I watched your film yesterday. And is that playing on PBS? Sky?
It's on PBS. They just extended my contract for 4 years. And it's on, because PBS distribution has it, it's on Amazon, iTunes, and Canopy. So I think if you have a library card, pretty much, you can probably watch it on Canopy as well.
Well, I encourage people to. I have to tell you, I did it yesterday afternoon, and as I already said, I was crying, but I was also inspired. It was uplifting. Now, I think, and then your book follows along with this, reiterates the stories of the people that what do you call them?
I call them the film stars.
Oh, yes, the film stars. It was darling. Now, of course, I don't want to play favorite, and I loved your favorite. But how do you not like Lucky Louie?
I have to say, besides my grandmother, he is one of my favorites. He just is adorable and so I mean, that man is just was such an amazing person, really.
And talk to us, please. Tell the audience about Louis and his purpose. I mean, he had
Well,
several, but
yeah. So Lucky Louie, also known as Dr. Lou Tadone, he was a pediatrician for many, many years here in San Luis Obispo. In fact, I think for many years there were only two pediatricians here. So most people that are my age, if they grew up in San Luis Obispo, chances are he was their pediatrician. And when he retired from doing that, he started making mozzarellas for his daughter's deli. And you might ask, why that? Well, because when he was younger and he grew up in Brooklyn, his parents had a deli, and his father passed away when he was fairly young. He was only 17. Lou was only 17 when that happened. And he took over the mozzarella making at his parents' deli. So when his daughter bought a deli and was getting it going, he said, oh, well, we should, let's make fresh mozzarella for your deli. And so he did that every day, 365 days out of the year. That was his purpose. And, it's really interesting because what I learned from interviewing all these many wonderful people is that we all need a sense of purpose, but that
yes.
purpose can change many times throughout our lives. So for Lou, it was, at one point being a father because he had 9 kids and being a pediatrician. And then it really was about making the mozzarellas every morning. That was his reason to get up and get out of bed and get going. And so it's very interesting to see how that can be dynamic and changing, but also how important having that sense of purpose is for everyone.
Absolutely. I loved, actually, I thought there are, just so people, the audience understand, there are pictures of the people that we're talking about in the book. There are quotes about the people that we're talking about in the book. There's their backstories. So of course, because of the age group, Sky, the stories of Marion Wolf, who, if people, this is part of talk about your project, the generation of people that disappear, and if people haven't recorded some of their stories or written some of it, no one knows. Do you know what I mean? Nobody knows. So when people see your film or read your book, they'll find out that Marion Wolf, which I had forgotten this part anyway, it was the occupation of Vienna, but she was only 8 years old, and in a British what is it called? Kindergarten?
Kindertransport. Yeah, the Kindertransport.
The Kindertransport. And I remember hearing about that years ago, Sky, but I'd forgotten it. And what it was is it was a mercy mission to get these children, mostly Jewish children, out of danger. And then families adopted them in different parts of the world, in London and Amsterdam. And this little girl was 8 years old, and her mother puts her on the train.
Yeah, and I will tell you that when I interviewed Marion, she still had the cardboard number that she wore around her neck at the age of 8 years old. And it was at that moment, I still get chills when I think about it, because
really,
I think, what was I doing at 8 years old? What would that have been like for me? I can't even imagine being that age, being separated from your family, going to a foreign country, not knowing if you'd ever see your family again, having to learn a new language. I mean, just all of those things. It just is phenomenal that she made it through that, and so many of the other children did. And she was lucky because she was on the very first Kindertransport out of Vienna, Austria. But at that moment, I had originally conceived of this project as collecting the words of wisdom of these older adults. And I realized that, number one, I had to make a film because I wanted to get it out there in a much bigger way than just like a web series. And number two, that in addition to collecting the words of wisdom, it was also about collecting these incredible stories of resilience and to preserve that history in some ways. And I think that you mentioned it before, if we don't ask these questions, these stories end up being lost. And so it's super important to ask those questions. And on our website, we have a place where people can, on the take action part of the website, where they can actually download the questions that I asked everyone in the film, because I think the hardest thing to do when you interview somebody is what questions do you ask? And
Yes.
it's really, if you sit down with somebody and you just say, well, tell me something about yourself, that's way too open-ended, and
Yes.
you don't get the answers that you want. So having a list, a starter question, some framework within which to work, I think is really helpful to get that dialogue going.
I think talking about resilience is one of the biggest, and not everyone, I don't know. Sky, this is a question for you. It has nothing, this is just a question. See, I think some people are born with more resilience than others. I've just seen this but I don't know if it's that they've really been born with it, or did they adopt it early on in life because they realized that they should? I don't know. Do you know what I mean? But I
Absolutely.
know, I don't know, but I know this for me, and this is just a personal thing. I've been resilient in my life, and that was something that made. And you have this quote in your book, and they say it's Confucius, but in television, I'm sure a producer took credit for it. But it's not how many times you got knocked down; it's how many times you get back up. And that, I learned that at a really early age, that you get up and you just keep going. But I think purpose, if you have a purpose, and then you are lucky enough, or you've worked on it, or you can be resilient, and then you mention positivity, which is attitude, which is another piece. And Louis, of course, said, I get up every day and I'm grateful. You know what I mean? He boiled it down to, I get up every day and I'm grateful. And that's a huge statement.
Yeah, and I think that I'm reminded quite often of one of the other people in the film, Evie Justison, who talked about reading Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. And if you haven't read that book, he was a Holocaust survivor, and he could not figure out by just looking at people who was going to survive based on their physical strength. It was much more about their attitude. And I think that what Evie took from that I have now taken, is that there are so many times in our lives where we cannot control the things that are happening around us. But what we can control is the attitude of how we deal with those things, or even reflecting back on things that happened. I think that is just as important as what's happening in the moment, is how we reflect back on the things that have happened. And I'll give you a really good example, which is Lucky Louie again, who he talked about, was driving up to San Francisco for a conference with his wife, and for some reason he borrowed somebody's car, and they got into a little fender bender. And Lucky Louie says, instead of being upset that he got into this fender bender, well, we're really lucky because the car's still drivable, so we're going to keep going. So they're driving up there, they get a flat tire. Oh, we're really lucky. There's a spare tire in the back. We're going to put the spare tire on. They get all the way up to San Francisco. They get to the conference. Oh, the conference has been canceled. We're really lucky. We have a beautiful day in San Francisco. So, at every turn where it could have been negative, and this is like a really, not a heavy example, but it just was the way that he lived his life. At every turn where it could have gone south, he decided he was going to go with the positive side instead of the negative side of what was being dealt to him at that moment. And that's not always easy to do, and I recognize that. But, that's why I say sometimes just even being able to reflect back on something that's happened and reframe it, I think, is really, really helpful, even in moving forward.
Well, when you say that, I read that in your book, and I could see him saying it. Do you know what I mean? I could see him with the twinkle in his eye, and that, but and after I asked you that, as you were talking, as an instructor, as a professor, as a teacher all those years, I'm sure, Sky, that you had to sometimes meet students that you'd think they're not going to make it in their, you know what I mean? Now, because I had that a lot. Cindy and I always took interns. I taught 3 or 4 workshops, which would have 20 to 30 people in them a year. Do you know what I mean? Besides just cooking classes. But I could usually tell in a class of 25 people from across the country and all different marketing jobs or food jobs, I would look out and I'd think only 2 of these kids are going to make it in styling or in live television, because not that they weren't talented. They were talented, but they weren't resilient. And I mean that in that they weren't tough enough. TV writing, you know this, having done what you've done and you've negotiated it. When you can write a book and nobody can buy it. You can write a book and people write horrible things to you on Amazon. Okay. I mean, and you have to, I'm like Lucky Louie. I think, well, they read it.
Yeah.
They may not have given me 5 stars, but they still bought it and read it. I mean, there is a point. Resilience is everything to me. It's just a lot. And then if you can be positive and resilient and have a purpose, like you said, lives well lived. When you were doing the interviews, when you asked people, I thought the questions, I read the questions in your book and everything. Was there an answer that really surprised you, Skye, in an interview?
That's a good question. I think that, one of the things that surprised me was when I asked people what their secret was to living a long life. I
Yes.
think people kind of expected maybe it would be more based around eating well or physical activity, when in fact that was not really the key thing that people said. I think it was much more about having a sense of purpose, about being surrounded with a good community, and about keeping and maintaining this kind of positive attitude. And so that did surprise me, that it wasn't more about a healthy lifestyle. That wasn't what it was about. It was really about being emotionally happy and I think comfortable in their own skin, and having,
Yes.
was a big part of it, because there were a number of people that I interviewed for the film, my dad included, who were not, my dad was in a wheelchair. He had had a stroke, and his left side was mostly paralyzed, but he was still a practicing physician. And what I learned from him was that he actually learned to be more grateful for the things that he had rather than focusing on the things that he didn't have. So he was grateful that he could still practice medicine and that he still had his mind and he could still speak. And I think that all the people in the film, that is more of what they focused on. Like Lucky Louie would say, when I would go over there, he was 97, and I'd say, "Hey, Lou, how are you doing this morning?" And he'd say, "Well, it's not like when I was 95. And I think, that was his way of saying, I acknowledge that my body is not what it was.
Yes.
And
Yes.
we are going to have changes, but I accept it and I'm moving on and I'm grateful for what I still can do." And I think that mindset is what's super important more than anything else. I think that is really important.
I agree with you and Lucky Louie. I totally agree. I thought all the people were interesting to me. I loved the artists. I loved the women that had talked about a third act, that had done other things and then said, I always wanted to paint. So now they're painting.
Right, exactly. I think that is really what it's all about. I think part of the problem when people retire, I say in quotes, from their day job, it's like, well, what do you want to do? What is your passion? I think for so many years we are conditioned to think that what we should be doing is making money. And then when that is out of the equation and we have this time, what do we really want to do? You have the time to think about what is it that you really want to do with your life, and what kind of legacy do you want to leave behind? And what are the things that you're still interested in when you take money out of that equation? And I think that's when sometimes people have a little bit of a stumbling block. I mean, everybody wants to travel. A lot of people want to travel. And then when that is, when you've done all the places you want to do, what is it that you really want to be doing? And how I think the people that are the most satisfied tend to be people that in some way are giving back in some way, whether it's to their family or to an organization by being, a part of a nonprofit and doing something, and they're engaged with other people. So that's the other thing that, of course, studies are showing, that isolation is what cuts down on somebody's life expectancy even more than smoking. So I think that being involved, being engaged. And that's why I really am promoting connecting generations, because I feel like that is such an important part of what our society needs, is to bring generations together. And it helps older people and younger people at the same time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I know you're in the midst of promoting your book. You've just signed another contract with PBS for 4 years. That's fantastic. I'm so proud of you. I worked for PBS many times. It's not, no one, people don't realize none of this is easy.
No.
Do you know what I mean? This is, it seems like it when I get the beautiful package flyer from you. It seems so easy.
Yeah.
But I know that it's not easy. What would you like? Do you know what you want to do next?
Oh, well, I'm already working on 2 other films, one of
Okay,
which is going
good.
to come out on PBS in May of 2025 for Asian American Pacific Islander Month. And that film is called Mochisuki, and it is about the Japanese tradition of making mochi to bring in the new year. And if you have not experienced mochi or know what it is, mochi is quite simply rice that is steamed and then pounded till it gets to a consistency like bread dough, and then they form it into these round balls that are mochi balls. And the film is really about the Japanese American tradition and culture as told through this mochisuki ceremony. And one thing, talking about resilience, the Japanese Americans, when they were interned during World War II, they still figured out a way to do this mochisuki ceremony as a way to bring in the new year, as a way to show some resilience and some sense of hope for what the new year could bring. And I also, on a personal note, love it because if you've ever seen it, it's so wonderful to see all the generations together, coming together through this common thing of making food together. And I think I grew up in my grandmother's kitchen, so I love how food can bring generations together. In fact, I would love to do a whole series called Pass the Fork, which is all about different cultures and what they do that brings generations together through food. Because I'm sure everyone listening can think about something that you did with your family or your community that was based around food. And I'm sure you can both relate to that as foodies as well.
I love that. And it made me think of a very good friend of mine who was she was an executive in charge of a big production company in LA. And I worked with her on several shows. And her grandmother died, and they were Japanese. Her father had been in an internment camp, and her grandparents also. She wasn't a cook. Of course, she wasn't a cook because she practically ran, this, and she ran about 15 shows. So, no, she wasn't a cook. But her grandmother had died, and she called me and she said, Denise, this is going to be the craziest question I've ever asked you. Do you know anything about coffee jello? I said, you mean Japanese coffee jello? Now, see, Sky, my husband loves Japan, has been there several times. I've been to Japan many times. I said, well, we'll find some. She said, because we can't have the holidays without coffee jello. And none of us ever learned how to make it because, of course, they assumed their grandmother, I guess, was going to live forever. And she was so dear about it. Anyway, I found a woman that was Japanese, and we wrote the recipe down, and we went to her house. And I kept thinking, is this really a Japanese recipe, or is this kind of like an Americanized something? It didn't matter. She got her coffee jello. Her name was Stacy, and she said, my whole family can't believe I made coffee jello. And it was food, and our memories about food are the threads in the tapestry.
Absolutely. And, I got into filmmaking because my grandmother was an amazing cook who never wrote a recipe down. And she came out to visit me for the first time from Florida to California. She'd never been to California before when she was 96. And for the next 4 summers, she spent the month of August with me. Because if you've ever been in Florida in August, it is a great time to get out of there. And California is beautiful. And she loved it out here. And we would quite literally go to the farmer's market on Thursday night. And then on Friday, we would cook all day. Yeah. And so because God forbid she should leave me with out filling my freezer full of food when she left. Course. So that was wonderful. I loved it. But I was lucky enough that cameras at that point started having the capability of doing video. And I thought, I not only do I want to write the recipe down of my grandmother, because she would say a pinch of this and a handful of that. And I was like, well, I want to measure your hand, you know?
Yeah.
And I just thought, I'm going to video her cooking because I want to capture not only the written recipe, but I want to hear the sound of her voice, the gesture that she makes, the whole thing. And that was my first foray into doing any filming at all, was filming my grandmother cooking in the kitchen. So I have her to thank for all this craziness that has ensued since then.
Well, it's a purpose.
Yes.
And it's very, very important. And I know how much I've enjoyed your book, but the film also, and meeting these people. And when I was on this last trip, so besides the whispers of women saying to me, "Are you alone?" and stuff, it also, what was a great thing, I saw people that were much older than me that got out onto that bus to go out and, to see a new city. And Sky, they were just as involved as they could be.
Yeah, absolutely.
When I got on that first bus, I looked around and I thought, my God, I'm like Gidget compared to Joan Crawford on this bus. I thought, I'm the same age as some of these people, but some of these people seem much older than me. But, once I got to know them, man, they were out there swinging. It was wonderful to see them enjoying themselves and enjoying their lives and enjoying everything they were doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
It gave me a great sense of satisfaction to watch other people living their lives like that and not being stuck at home.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how can people get your book?
Well, the book is on Amazon. So if you
Perfect.
just look under my name, the other way that people can learn about all the projects that I'm working on, all the films that I'm doing, because I have another film that I'm working on about a band in Santa Barbara, which is just so much fun. If they go to my website, which is just skybergmanproductions.com, and my name is spelled SKYBERGMAN productions.com. And you can see the link to the book there, the film, to the other projects that I'm working on. And that's a great way to connect with me, is to get on that website.
Well, I am so grateful that I went with Pat that night.
Me too.
Because I'm not exaggerating. I said to my husband, he knew because I'd come upstairs and I was in my office. And I watched your film, and then I was glancing through the book and reading it, and of course marking every page that Louis was on, post it so I could go back and read them again. And I thought to myself, what a wonderful way to spend the afternoon.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind.
Oh no, what a wonderful way to celebrate life by reading your book. I totally appreciate it. Now, so everyone, you know how to reach Sky. When Cindy broadcasts, she always puts your information up, Sky, so people don't have to remember. And because a lot of times at this age, the only thing I will say is that someone tells me something and a minute later I think, oh, I should have written that down.
Right.
Because it's already gone. But anyway, thank you for everyone that's listening. When you have questions, people email us on our Women Beyond a Certain Age Facebook page. If people want to ask me questions, lots of times they private message me because they don't want to put it on the wall or the Facebook page, and I totally understand that. So, and I want to thank Cindy as always for, no matter how desperate her internet is, she makes it work. Talk about resilience. And thank you, Sky, again, because I know how busy you are. And this was just delightful. And I hope that, now you have to come back when you're working on your next film and tell us about it.
Absolutely. I have 2 films in the works, so I will be happy to share them with you when I get them done.
Good for you. Well, thank you so much. And thanks everyone that listens, and thanks for your messages and reviews. We appreciate it. And we'll talk to you again, Sky. Bye-bye.
All right. Sounds good. Take care.
Bye.